Lincoln Henderson was a pioneer of bourbon, especially a visionary for the finished bourbon. After developing Gentleman Jack Daniel's Single Barrel and Woodford Reserve, Lincoln was inducted into the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame and retired. But 3 years later, Lincoln's son, Wes, convinced him that his story had just begun. Lincoln came out of retirement and started a bourbon brand that would give his family a beautiful legacy, one that would transcend barrels, 3 generations, and now the digital frontier. Bourbon may only have a few ingredients, but Angel's Envy is only as good as the people who make it. Luckily, we started with a legend. So here's your first big tip when it comes to bourbon. If it's not at least 51% corn, it's not bourbon. That's a fact. All bourbon is at least 51% corn, and then it's usually a mix of barley and rye. The more corn, the sweeter a bourbon you get. Angel's Envy is 72% corn, 18% rye, and 10% barley. As each 13,500-gallon batch of mash transforms, the changeover of the mix and mash causes organic chemical reactions. Over about 3 days, the mash ferments into what will finally be the distiller's beer, about 9 to 10% alcohol by volume. That beer gets pumped into our distillation column. Next, the evaporating mash rises up through the column still and condenses at the top, coming back down to the pot still doubler below. Beer is pumped to one of the top two beer trays inside the column. Look at how the beer flows across each plate and down to the next plate until it reaches the bottom. Steam is forced upward from below through the holes in the plates, heating the beer and vaporizing the alcohol on the way up. The beer has been liberated of all the alcohol on the way down and exits the bottom of the still as spent stillage. See the steam rising through the column? It increases in alcohol content on the way up and exits the top as approximately 64% alcohol for our bourbon. This doubler then takes the distilled vapor through a second distillation process, condensing it to a liquid before boiling, increasing both the alcohol content and quality. That vapor is condensed, and as a liquid, it runs into the doubler, where it is reheated and boiled. All part of the magic. And the vapor from the doubler now has higher alcohol content, approximately 69% for our bourbon, 67.5% for our finished rye. The vapor from the doubler is condensed again and is collected as new spirit that will be diluted, and that is what goes into our aging barrels. Mark your name onto this new barrel. But remember, the liquid that goes in is not Angel's Envy until it's finished. It's time to fill that white oak barrel with your distilled new make. Of course, we'll need to use the bung hammer to seal the barrel to make sure we won't lose any of that precious new make. And yes, it's actually called a bung. This bourbon will age for 4 to 6 years, expanding into the barrel in the heat of the summer and contracting out in cold winter snaps, lending outstanding flavor to our bourbon. This is where we get our namesake. Why? 3 to 5% of the spirit is lost to evaporation each year as the whiskey ages, and it goes to the angels as their share. But we get to keep the best, and that's the Angel's Envy. Let's give this barrel a push through time. In the metaverse, 4 to 6 years of bourbon aging can happen in a flash. Did you know that the flavor and color in bourbon comes from the wood of the barrel? Bourbon drinks up the flavor and color from the wood. Each bourbon barrel is only used once. They're often sent off to Scotland to age Scotch whiskey, and usually will have many lives after that as well. Here's where things get interesting. At Angel's Envy, we use these port wine barrels to age our bourbon a second time for 3 to 6 months and give it a delicious finish. That wood-soaked and port wine from the Douro Valley of Portugal breathes new life into bourbon, giving it the sophisticated and nuanced flavor we all love. This is what makes Angel's Envy one of a kind. It's a finished bourbon. Let me give this barrel a push through time. You see, in the metaverse, 4 to 6 months of bourbon aging takes a second. Envious yet? This second aging process is where all those rich flavors sift through the Kentuckian summers and powdery winters, filtering from that port wine wood into the bourbon. Have you ever bottled your own bourbon? Give it a try by clicking the bottle. Here's something a little extra special and sweet. Fill out this CAPTCHA, and Angel's Envy will give you